When I first encountered the problem of divine existence through mathematical lens, my colleagues in the Royal Society thought I had lost my mind. How could probability theory, that elegant discipline born from our correspondence about dice games, possibly illuminate the greatest question of human existence? Yet here we stand, centuries later, with a calculation so precise it threatens the comfortable agnosticism of modern academia. The same mathematical rigor that revolutionized physics and established probability theory now reveals something far more unsettling, that denying God's existence is not skeptical sophistication, but statistical suicide. Today, we'll examine why the greatest wager in human history isn't philosophical speculation, but mathematical necessity. Every scientist who claims intellectual honesty while avoiding this calculation commits the very sin they accuse believers of, ignoring evidence that contradicts their predetermined conclusion. The numbers don't lie, even when our hearts desperately want them to. Let's see what happens when we apply the same analytical precision to divine existence that we use for atmospheric pressure experiments. Chapter 1: The Birth of Mathematical Certainty. The scientific revolution taught us something profound: mathematical truth transcends human opinion. When I dropped mercury in glass tubes to study atmospheric pressure, nature responded with mathematical precision regardless of my personal preferences. The mercury column measured exactly 76 centimeters at sea level, not because I willed it so, but because mathematical relationships govern physical reality. This revelation transformed how I approached every question, including the ultimate one. My correspondence with Fermat about probability began with gambling problems, seemingly trivial questions about dice and card games. Yet these calculations revealed something extraordinary: uncertainty itself follows mathematical laws. We could quantify the likelihood of future events based on present evidence. This wasn't mere speculation, it was rigorous analysis of incomplete information, the very situation we face regarding divine existence. The breakthrough came when I realized that probability theory doesn't require complete certainty to make rational decisions. In fact, it's designed specifically for situations where absolute proof remains impossible. When a merchant decides whether to ship goods despite uncertain weather, he doesn't wait for meteorological certainty. He calculates expected outcomes based on available evidence and acts accordingly. The same principle applies to existence's ultimate question. Mathematical thinking revealed the false dilemma plaguing discussions of divine existence. We don't need absolute proof or absolute disproof to make rational decisions about God. We need only to calculate expected outcomes based on available evidence and probability assessments. This transforms the question from philosophical speculation to mathematical analysis, exactly the kind of thinking that built modern science. The resistance to this approach reveals something telling about human nature. The same scientists who embrace uncertainty principles in physics suddenly demand absolute certainty in theology. They apply mathematical thinking to atmospheric pressure but resist it for spiritual pressure. This inconsistency suggests that resistance to divine existence isn't based on scientific rigor, but on psychological comfort with a universe requiring no divine accountability. Chapter 2: Calculating the Infinite Stakes. Let me present the calculation that changed everything. Consider two possibilities: God exists or God doesn't exist. Consider two choices: believe or don't believe. This creates four possible outcomes, each with calculable consequences. The mathematical analysis reveals why atheism represents the worst possible bet in human history. If God doesn't exist and you don't believe, you gain nothing eternal but lose nothing either. If God doesn't exist and you do believe, you lose some finite pleasures but gain meaning, hope, and moral framework during this life. Neither scenario involves infinite consequences. The mathematics here deals with finite quantities only. But if God exists and you believe, you gain infinite happiness, eternal meaning, and perfect fulfillment. If God exists and you don't believe, You lose infinite happiness and face eternal separation from ultimate reality. These scenarios involve infinite quantities, which changes everything mathematically. When calculating expected outcomes, we multiply probability by consequence. Even if you assign God's existence only a tiny probability, say 1% or even 1/10%, the expected value of belief becomes infinite. Any finite probability multiplied by infinite gain equals infinite expected value. Conversely, any finite probability multiplied by infinite loss equals infinite expected loss. This isn't theological manipulation, it's mathematical necessity. The same calculation that guides insurance companies, investment strategies, and scientific research protocols demands belief in God as the only rational choice. To reject this conclusion, you must either assign zero probability to God's existence, claiming absolute certainty of atheism, or deny that divine existence would have infinite consequences. The first option requires extraordinary intellectual arrogance. The greatest scientific minds in history, Newton, Kepler, Galileo, Mendel, Pasteur, found compelling evidence for divine existence. To assign zero probability to their conclusion demands evidence more powerful than theirs combined. The second option denies the logical implications of divine existence itself. If an infinite, perfect being exists, relationship with that being naturally involves infinite consequences. Modern objections often miss this mathematical core. Critics claim the wager involves false choices or cultural bias, but these objections ignore the underlying calculation. The mathematical structure remains valid regardless of which specific religion proves correct, because any authentic divine reality involves infinite stakes worthy of serious investigation. Chapter 3: The Evidence Multiplier Effect. Mathematical probability becomes more compelling when we examine the evidence supporting divine existence. My wager doesn't depend on blind faith, but on evidence-based probability assessment combined with infinite consequences. The more evidence we discover, the higher the probability, and the more mathematically necessary belief becomes. Consider the fine-tuning of physical constants. The electromagnetic force, strong nuclear force, weak nuclear force, and gravity exist in precise ratios permitting complex chemistry. Alter any constant by fractions of a percent, and stars cannot form, elements cannot bond, or atoms cannot hold together. The probability of this occurring by chance resembles winning a cosmic lottery millions of times consecutively. Mathematical analysis of biological information reveals similar precision. DNA contains information density exceeding the most sophisticated human technologies. The probability of random processes generating functional genetic code compares to hurricanes assembling functional computers from junkyard materials. Yet life demonstrates information processing capabilities that our best mathematicians struggle to comprehend. The historical evidence for Christianity adds another probability layer. Multiple independent sources document Christ's existence, teaching, crucifixion, and the early disciples' transformation from fearful followers to fearless martyrs. The probability that elaborate fabrication explains this evidence decreases as we examine details. Mathematical analysis of testimony reliability suggests these events occurred as reported. Philosophical arguments provide additional probability support. The cosmological argument demonstrates that everything beginning to exist requires a cause, while the universe clearly began to exist. The teleological argument shows that design requires designers, while nature exhibits design at every level. The moral argument reveals that objective moral values require transcendent foundation, while we universally recognize such values. Each evidence stream individually increases the probability of divine existence. Combined, they create what mathematicians call convergent evidence, multiple independent lines pointing toward the same conclusion. This multiplies rather than merely adds to the overall probability, making divine existence more mathematically likely than many scientific theories we accept without question. The beauty lies in how this evidence enhances rather than replaces the wager's mathematical structure. Even without evidence, infinite stakes make belief rational with any finite probability above zero. With substantial evidence pointing toward divine existence, the calculation becomes overwhelming. Rejecting God under these conditions represents mathematical irrationality dressed as scientific sophistication. Chapter 4: The Experimental Verification Principle. True scientific thinking demands experimental verification of hypotheses. My approach to divine existence follows the same methodology that revolutionized physics: propose hypotheses, test them through experience, and evaluate results objectively. Christianity offers unique experimental opportunities because it makes testable claims about prayer, moral transformation, and spiritual experience. The prayer experiment intrigued me most. Christianity claims that sincere communication with God produces measurable results, not magical manipulation of physical laws, but genuine interaction with divine intelligence. I approached this like any scientific investigation: establish baseline conditions, implement the intervention consistently, and measure outcomes carefully. Initial results proved remarkable. Prayers for wisdom preceded unexpected insights into mathematical problems. Requests for strength coincided with ability to maintain moral standards that previously seemed impossible. Petitions for peace accompanied unprecedented calm during family crises and social turbulence. These correlations could represent coincidence, but their frequency and specificity suggested genuine causation. The moral transformation experiment yielded even stronger evidence. Christianity promises that divine grace enables character changes impossible through human willpower alone. My attempts at self-improvement through rational discipline had achieved limited success. But seeking divine assistance in moral development produced dramatic results that skeptics found difficult to explain through purely naturalistic mechanisms. Community verification strengthened these individual experiments. Other believers reported similar outcomes from prayer and spiritual discipline. Their character transformations were visible, measurable, and sustained over decades. The probability that psychological suggestion explains such widespread, lasting change becomes vanishingly small when examined mathematically. The spiritual experience experiment provided the most compelling evidence. Christianity claims that God communicates directly with human consciousness through what believers call the Holy Spirit. My scientific background initially dismissed such claims as subjective delusion. But careful attention to inner experience revealed communications that displayed intelligence, consistency, and knowledge beyond my natural capacity. These experiments don't constitute absolute proof, but they provide empirical data supporting divine existence claims. The same standard of evidence that establishes scientific theories, reproducible results from testable hypotheses, supports Christian truth claims. Scientists who demand different standards for spiritual investigation commit methodological inconsistency. The verification principle reveals why so many scientists throughout history became believers. They applied experimental methodology to spiritual questions and discovered evidence supporting divine existence. Modern scientific culture often discourages such investigation, preferring theoretical objections to actual experimentation. This represents abandonment of scientific method in favor of philosophical prejudice. Chapter 5: Dismantling the scientific objections. Contemporary scientists often claim that divine existence contradicts scientific knowledge, but careful analysis reveals these objections rest on philosophical assumptions rather than empirical evidence. The greatest scientific discoveries actually support rather than undermine divine existence, when examined without materialistic prejudice. Evolution represents the most common scientific objection to divine existence. Critics claim that natural selection eliminates the need for divine creation. But this confuses mechanism with causation. Discovering how God creates doesn't eliminate God any more than understanding atmospheric pressure eliminates the need for mathematical laws governing pressure relationships. Evolution could represent God's method of creation rather than proof of God's absence. Mathematical analysis of evolutionary probability reveals serious problems with purely naturalistic explanations. The odds against random mutations producing functional proteins resemble the odds against hurricanes assembling Boeing 747s from scrap metal. Even billions of years provide insufficient time for random processes to generate the biological complexity we observe. Divine guidance makes evolutionary success mathematically plausible. Cosmological objections prove equally weak under analysis. Some scientists claim that universe creation doesn't require divine causation because quantum mechanics permits particles to appear without classical causes. But quantum events still follow mathematical laws and probability distributions. These laws themselves require explanation. An infinite regress of natural laws leads to logical contradictions requiring transcendent foundation. The fine-tuning evidence grows stronger as physics advances. Recent discoveries reveal that dozens of physical constants must fall within incredibly narrow ranges to permit complex chemistry. The probability of this occurring without intelligent design approaches zero. Multiverse theories attempt to avoid this conclusion by proposing infinite universes with all possible constants, but these theories lack empirical evidence and raise more questions than they answer. Consciousness presents perhaps the greatest challenge to materialistic science. Despite centuries of research, neuroscience cannot explain how electrical activity in brain tissue produces subjective experience. The hard problem of consciousness suggests that mind involves more than complex computation. Divine existence provides elegant explanation for consciousness as spiritual rather than merely material phenomenon. The origin of mathematical truth itself supports divine existence. Mathematical relationships exist independently of human discovery and govern physical reality with perfect precision. These abstract truths require explanation that purely material processes cannot provide. Mathematical Platonism suggests realm of eternal truths that closely resembles divine mind containing all mathematical relationships. Historical analysis reveals that most scientific pioneers were believers who saw their research as investigation of divine creation. Newton spent more time on theology than physics. Kepler described astronomy as thinking God's thoughts after him. Mendel was a monk who saw genetics as revealing divine design. The supposed conflict between science and religion is modern fiction contradicted by historical evidence. Current resistance to divine existence in scientific communities reflects sociological rather than empirical factors. Academic culture rewards materialistic explanations and punishes supernatural hypotheses regardless of evidence. This represents corruption of scientific method rather than application of scientific thinking. Chapter 6: The Infinite Gain Calculation. The mathematical beauty of divine existence lies in how infinite gain transforms every probability calculation. Even skeptics who assign minimal probability to God's existence cannot escape the overwhelming logic of infinite expected value. This mathematical reality transcends personal preference, cultural background, or emotional resistance to divine authority. Consider what infinite gain actually means. Not merely unlimited duration, but unlimited quality of experience. Perfect knowledge satisfying every intellectual curiosity. Perfect love fulfilling every relational need. Perfect creativity enabling unlimited expression. Perfect peace resolving every anxiety. Perfect justice satisfying every moral concern. Such existence cannot be compared to any finite pleasure or achievement. The mathematics becomes clearer when we consider specific probabilities. Suppose you believe only one chance in a million exists that God exists. Expected value equals probability multiplied by consequence. 1/millionth times infinity still equals infinity. Even if you assign only one chance in a billion, the expected value remains infinite. The only way to escape infinite expected value is to assign exactly zero probability to divine existence. But zero probability requires absolute certainty of atheism. This demands evidence more conclusive than evidence for any scientific theory, because we never assign zero probability to well-supported scientific hypotheses. The theory of evolution maintains some finite probability of being wrong. Quantum mechanics might need revision or replacement. Even mathematical theorems occasionally require correction when errors are discovered in proofs. Claiming absolute certainty about God's non-existence requires greater confidence than physicists have about fundamental laws of nature. Such certainty seems intellectually arrogant given the limitations of human knowledge and the complexity of ultimate reality. Honest assessment suggests that divine existence deserves at least minimal probability consideration. The infinite loss calculation proves equally compelling. If God exists and you reject relationship with ultimate reality, the consequences extend beyond this life into eternity. Separation from infinite good equals infinite loss, regardless of how we calculate specific details. Missing infinite happiness represents infinite tragedy, mathematically speaking. Critics sometimes object that infinite consequences seem unfair or manipulative. But fairness concerns don't alter mathematical reality. If divine existence involves infinite stakes, then infinite stakes exist whether we like it or not. Our preferences cannot change logical implications of infinite perfect being's existence. The manipulation objection misses the point entirely. I'm not threatening anyone with consequences I created, but revealing consequences that follow logically from the nature of reality. If a building is burning, warning people about fire danger isn't manipulation but compassionate information sharing. If infinite stakes accompany divine existence, revealing those stakes serves truth rather than manipulation. Other religious traditions might offer competing infinite gains, but this doesn't eliminate the mathematical necessity of taking infinite stakes seriously. If multiple religions promise infinite rewards, rational investigation becomes even more important. The worst possible choice involves ignoring all religious claims and missing infinite gain through intellectual pride or spiritual laziness. Chapter 7: Living the Mathematical Conclusion. Understanding the mathematical necessity of divine belief transforms how we approach spiritual investigation. This isn't mere intellectual exercise but practical guidance for life's most important decision. The same analytical rigor that guides scientific research must guide spiritual exploration if we claim intellectual honesty. Practical implementation begins with sincere investigation of religious truth claims. Christianity offers specific historical claims about Jesus Christ that can be evaluated through standard historical methodology. Archaeological evidence, manuscript testimony, and early church development provide empirical data for assessment. Mathematical analysis of this evidence supports Christian claims more strongly than evidence for many accepted historical events. Prayer becomes experimental procedure rather than superstitious ritual. Approach divine communication with same systematic methodology used in scientific research. Establish regular practice, maintain careful records of requests and outcomes, and evaluate results objectively over extended periods. The evidence accumulates through consistent investigation rather than sporadic attempts. Scripture study transforms into data analysis rather than literary appreciation. Biblical texts make factual claims about historical events, human nature, moral reality, and spiritual truth that can be tested through experience and research. Cross-reference biblical descriptions of human psychology with modern behavioral science. Compare biblical historical claims with archaeological discoveries. Evaluate biblical moral teachings through their practical outcomes in individual lives and societies. Community involvement provides essential verification and support. Christianity emphasizes communal rather than purely individual spiritual experience. Engaging with mature believers offers opportunity to observe long-term results of Christian living and to receive guidance in spiritual development. Their transformed lives provide additional empirical evidence supporting Christian truth claims. Moral transformation serves as ongoing experiment in divine grace. Christianity promises supernatural assistance in character development that surpasses purely human effort. Testing this claim requires honest assessment of personal moral failures and sincere requests for divine help in overcoming them. The results provide measurable evidence of divine involvement in human life. Intellectual integration remains crucial throughout this process. Divine existence doesn't require abandoning rational thinking but rather applying it consistently to spiritual questions. The same analytical skills that advance scientific knowledge can advance spiritual understanding when applied without materialistic prejudice. The mathematical calculation changes everything about life priorities. If infinite stakes truly accompany divine existence, then spiritual investigation deserves more attention than career advancement, entertainment, or even scientific research. This doesn't mean abandoning other pursuits, but rather pursuing them within framework of eternal perspective. Resistance to this conclusion often stems from misunderstanding divine requirements rather than rejecting mathematical logic. Christianity doesn't demand intellectual suicide or moral perfection, but rather humble acknowledgement of human limitation and sincere desire for divine relationship. The infinite gain becomes accessible through divine grace rather than human achievement. Living the mathematical conclusion means making spiritual investigation our highest priority while maintaining intellectual integrity throughout the process. The same commitment to truth that drives scientific research must drive spiritual exploration. The stakes are too high for casual investigation or willful ignorance. Conclusion. The mathematical proof stands unshaken. Divine existence involves infinite stakes that make belief rationally necessary regardless of probability assessment. This isn't religious manipulation but logical necessity revealed through the same analytical thinking that built modern science. The greatest scientists throughout history recognized this truth and found that rigorous investigation strengthened rather than weakened their faith. My journey from mathematical skepticism to convinced faith followed evidence wherever it led, applying experimental methodology to spiritual questions with the same rigor I applied to atmospheric pressure studies. The results convinced me that Christianity offers the most mathematically probable explanation for available evidence, combined with infinite consequences that make investigation absolutely essential. The tragedy of modern academic culture lies in its abandonment of scientific method when approaching spiritual questions. The same scholars who demand evidence-based conclusions in their research reject evidence-based approaches to divine existence through philosophical prejudice rather than empirical analysis. True intellectual honesty requires applying analytical thinking consistently across all domains of human experience. I challenge you to approach divine existence with the same mathematical rigor you would apply to any important decision involving uncertain outcomes and significant consequences. Calculate the expected values. Examine the evidence. Test the claims through careful experimentation. The mathematics demands investigation. An investigation leads to transformation that satisfies both mind and heart in ways that pure rationalism never could achieve.